Continuing our reading in Abraham Hannibal and the Raiders of the Sands. Today, by Francis Summers Cox. Today is chapter 21 called Sold into Slavery. And the date for this is February to April in the year 1704. There followed long months when, time and again, Abraham nearly did give up hope. There was the slave market by the great mosque at Mecca, where would-be buyers peered at his teeth and his tongue and poked his ribs. And at last a skinny old Turkish merchant called Ahmed bought him and a stock of other slaves and took him away from Tadis and Afterwork, the last two links with his home. And as Abraham was led off by his new master, he thought, I could belong to this man for the rest of my life, under orders forever, like a mule or a plow ox. And that's how he looks at me, as if I was his mule or his ox. I wonder if father's slaves felt like this when they were captured. I suppose we never talked about it. Then there were the 40 days and nights of trudging up the stony Arabian desert with the long, slow Egyptian caravan of some 20,000 camels, trudging through the night because of the unbearable heat of the day, trudging by the light of flaming wood lamps carried on the top of tall poles, until as the morning sun began to bake the air and the sand beneath their feet, they stopped and made camp and ate and slept at the last. With the cooling of the day, reloaded the camels and set off again through the night. And 5 times a day, the whole caravan stopped, whatever the heat, and turned to pray in the direction they had come from, the direction of Mecca. And Abraham knelt and bowed and stood up together with Master Ahmed and the thousands upon thousands of believers. It was all those thousands of believers who wore down his courage, the courage that had made him stand up to Kamel and the king of Mecca. It seemed ridiculous even to try to be the odd one out, but the prayers that he said under his breath were the prayers that his mother and Abba Michael had taught him, the prayers of the Christians. Abraham never felt easy in his mind doing those times of prayer. It did seem like cheating every time he bowed down toward Mecca. Bit by bit, I'm turning into somebody else. It's my real life slipping further and further away from me. So is my real home. Something got lost forever with my little silver cross. I'm not me anymore. And one thought was always at the front of his mind. I have to get away from Master Ahmed. I have to get free. And then no one can make me do this ever again. I will get to France and deliver my message to the Sun King. And every time they made camp and he lay down to sleep, Abraham whispered to himself, like a magic charm, the words of his message to the King of the Franks. At last the desert of Arabia ended, but then there was the long, steep mountainside as they rounded the north of the Red Sea, where the camels died of exhaustion in their hundreds. And then the terrifying wastes of Sinai, where the path leads between sheer mountains of bare rock trembling with heat. All these weeks Abraham was shooting up, growing taller and taller, although the food was poor, and thinner and older in the face, stronger in the legs. But there was no one who knew him to notice the change, no one to say, as his father always used to say when he came home from a long journey, By St. George, Abraham, you've grown. You'll be as tall as me in no time. His father's joke, when he was in a good mood, was to pick Abraham up and hold him up so that the boy's head was level with his own. Look, Abraham, you're as tall as me already. But here in the desert, he was just any black slave, one of hundreds, and nobody knew him. Even his name had changed. He wasn't Abraham anymore, but had to answer to the Muslim way of saying his name, Ibrahim. At last there was green again, the wheat and cotton fields by the river Nile. But soon there was the terror of Cairo, a city of 100 times bigger and busier than any Abraham had ever seen, where his master Ahmet had business selling and buying. Oh, the noise, the stink, the donkeys, the horse carts and the camels, the numberless huge houses and endless narrow twisting streets. The fear of getting lost, of being run down by a cart, and always having to rush between markets and inns, tea houses and the riverside, taking messages and delivering packages, always bony, wrinkled Master Ahmet whining at him, his little gray beard waggling. Don't you understand anything, Abraham, you fool? What took you so long? Abraham, come here. What do you mean you couldn't find the place, Abraham? Very soon a thought tempted him, but not for long. I could just slip off down one of these alleyways and Master Ahmet would never find me. But what's the use? How could I ever reach the land of the Franks or get home? Imagine a black boy on the loose who can't account for himself. I'd be arrested in no time. Then there was a boat down the Nile to Alexandria on the seacoast, where Master Ahmet hired a Turkish ship to load his cargo, wheat and dried fruit, cotton and coffee, silk, perfume and humans, and carry it to Istanbul. The goods and the grown-up slaves were packed down into the cargo hold, but Abraham and the other slave children just had their wrists tied together and were allowed to stay on deck. They had to wait 4 days for the right wind, and then the ship sailed out past the old castle that guards the harbor of Alexandria and into the blue of the Mediterranean Sea, stained with the mud that the Nile had carried so many thousand miles from the mountains of Ethiopia. And Abraham looked back at the land he was leaving and looked at Africa for the last time. But the ship was never to reach Istanbul. And that's the end of chapter 21.